Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for making it to this part of the day. We are at our last roundtable for day 2 of the Art Summit. And I wanted to introduce this panel really quickly with a couple of thoughts. This panel is titled Hawaii to Palestine, Unlearning, Resistance, and Affirmation. This panel came to be in many different ways, as many of the panels you've heard today and yesterday. I've learned that one of the things that Aloha calls for is this notion of interdependence and connectivity. And we heard earlier today from the incredible Brandy with her poetry and readings about the way in which we are all connected. And she evoked this idea of circles or circling, starting in one place, going out, and coming back in. And this is something that we are interested in thinking about with the triennial theme, Aloha No. How are we rooted here in Hawaii? How do we look out? And how do we come back and bring it all back here to Hawaii? So today's panel is considering a provocation by an artist, Yazan Khalili, who will be participating in the triennial next year. And the panel will discuss notions of homeland, unlearning and learning, allyship, transnational justice, and solidarity. And so as our panelists make it up here, I'm going to introduce our 2 moderators. And then I want to read a short poem, which I had been going back and forth about whether or not to read it. But after listening to Brandy talk about circles and spirals and spiraling, this poem felt really urgent to read as a way to kind of position ourselves here before this panel. So I'll go ahead and introduce our moderators first. So the panel this afternoon is moderated by Navid Najafi, aka Illnomatic, who is a musician and an artist whose practice is activated hip-hop with lyrics that explore themes of migration, culture, solidarity, and home. He is a founding member of the conscious rap collective Supergroupers and a 3-time Nahoku Hano Hano Award winner for Hip Hop Album of the Year. Navid was born in Tehran, Iran, but at the age of 8, fled with his family to New York at the height of the Iran-Iraq War. After several relocations and years of feeling unrooted, he finally found home when he came to Hawaii at the age of 19. He has always worked to uplift and center the voices and stories of Kanaka Maoli and Hawaii nationals, who he calls are his treasured hosts. Along with Supergroupers, he founded Sound Shop, a hip-hop education workshop program with public school students at the Honolulu Museum of Art right here in the Doris Duke Theater. Navid is currently the curator of programs and social practice at Shangri Museum of Art, Culture, and Design here in Honolulu, which is a center of the Doris Duke Foundation. Our second moderator is Ihilani Lasconia, a Kanaka Oiwi student, artist, and organizer from Waimanalo, Oahu. As an activist and transnational feminist, her community work is centered on deoccupying Hawaii and building solidarity. Ihilani is currently a doctoral student in Indigenous politics at the University of Hawaii Manoa, where her research focuses on historical and contemporary connections between Hawaii and Palestine. As an artist, her work generates from their experience of being queer and Native in the 21st century. So I'll welcome our moderators and panelists to the stage. As you take your seats, I'm going to start with the short poem that I'm going to read. This poem is titled The Spiral. And it is written by an artist named Hadra Wahid, and accompanies a video work of hers titled The Spiral that she made in 2019. The spiral is much more than just a form. Its motion can be centrifugal and centripetal. It can denote both growth and decay, ascent and descent, evolution and involution, accumulation and dissolution. It expands and contracts, increases and decreases, reveals even as it hides, all the while offering back anew whatever it receives. It is not amnesia nor the status quo. It is not sapless nor atrophied. It does not settle nor occupy. It does not want you to believe it is immutable, inevitable, invulnerable, unchangeable. It is not naively cynical, where perfection is a measure by which all else falls short. It is a study and not an art. Indeed, it is not perfect. It is a dance of moving closer to the beloved, the possibility of approaching the essence, a way to understand and process time and space. A rooted blade of grass circling around itself, it is the form of smoke entering the air, the reverberations of a drop of rain on another body of water, the form of embryos and the cylindrical helices of our umbilical cords that tether mother to child, of blooming date palms and the curvature of seashells. It is the waveforms found in heart cells, rhythmically contracting to produce each beat, and the shape that nerve cells take before firing into the brain at the slightest onset of fear. The form of DNA strands resume, that whirlpools inhabit, that fingerprints fortify, the elliptical discs of spiral galaxies, the approach of a hawk to its prey, the approach of an insect to a source of light. By maintaining the same shape through each successive turn, the least amount of energy is used. It reverberates ad infinitum, informs our perspectives, and grants us insight into what is visible and invisible. It is the practice of return. It is never redundant. It is the act of remembering, the act of making oneself whole again. As its eye, its compass, allows us to stand in the center, in the middle of a storm. It reminds us that just as everything comes together, everything falls apart again. It is standing in full knowledge of this remaining undefeated despair. It is a way of seeing, the gift of wild possibilities and untold stories. It is the belief that what we do matters. It is made from the power and will of individuals and unarmed people, from the extraordinary achievement of ordinary people and ordinary daily actions, of tending to, listening to, watching over, and protecting. It is survival as revival, resistance as reclamation, resilience as transformation. It represents the awareness of the self and the expansion of this awareness outwards. It is about community, collaboration, attaching and being attached, about keeping an open heart in the face of a broken one. Change is rarely a straightforward line. Thank you.
Wow. Aloha, everybody. Thank you so much for that beautiful poem, Wasana, and for the introductions. My name is Navid.
Aloha mai kako. My name is Ihilani Lasconia. We'll be your MCs, but formerly moderators, typically up here doing hip hop. So this is fun, and the layer are fantastic. So, mahalo. Okay, so we're gonna go off and introduce our incredible panelists and artists. There's one artist who won't be here today, but he's offered a manifesto of sorts that I believe will be passed around and distributed. Right, so this is from Yazan, and I'll read his. Yeah, I'm gonna read. I'll read his bio now while that's distributed, and then read other artists' bios. So this is Yazan's. Yazan Khalili is a visual artist, architect, and cultural activist. Khalili's photography is detailed, reflective, and full of intent. Using photography and the written word, Khalili unpacks historically constructed landscapes. Borrowing from cinematic language, images become frames where the spectator embodies the progression of time and narratives, who weaves together parallel stories over the years, forming both questions and paradoxes concerning scenery and the act of gazing, all of which are refracted through the prism of inanimate objects or intimate politics and alienating poetics. In particular, he focuses on the effect of geographical distance on our rendering of territory and its ability to heighten or arrest our political and sentimental attachments. The next artist that I will introduce is Lehuauakea. Mahalo for being here today. So Lehuauakea is a native Hawaiian interdisciplinary artist and kapa maker, born in Portland, Oregon, and raised in Papa'iko, Hawaii. Lehuau's Kanaka Maoli family descends from several lineages connected to Maui, Kauai, Mokuokeawe, where their family resides today, with a particular focus on labor-intensive making of kapa, or Hawaiian bark cloth, ohekapala, carving bamboo printing tools, and use of natural pigments. Lehuau is able to breathe new life into patterns and traditions practiced for generations. Though these traditional native Hawaiian craft practices, their work addresses themes of environmental relations, indigenous culture resilience, and contemporary Kanaka Maoli identity.
All right. Welcome, Lehua. I'm going to introduce the amazing Russell Sunabe. Yeah, give it up for Russell. No. And Lehua. We'll do a full round of applause for everybody after the intro. So, Russell Sunabe was born and raised in Hakalau in Ahupua'a along the Hamakua coast of Hawaii Island. He currently resides in Kaka'ako on Oahu, maintaining a studio in downtown Honolulu. Working in oil as his medium, Sunabe paints postmodern allegorical narratives utilizing both figurative and abstract elements from a Hawaii and Hawaiian Creole context. Favorite metaphors have been the wild pig, poi dog, shark, and kalo. But most important are the roles of land and ocean. Stories are drawn from experiences from his life on the island of Hawaii and the spirit of place. So welcome, Russell. Yeah. So we're also joined by another very amazing artist, Melissa Chimera. Born and raised in Hawaii, Melissa is a conservationist whose work consists of research-based investigations into species extinction, globalization, and human migration. She studied natural resource management at the University of Hawaii at Manoa and has worked in Pacific Island land stewardship and environmental education since 1996. Her solo and curatorial exhibitions include Remittance 2022, Above the Equator Gallery, Migrant in 2019 at the Honolulu Museum of Art, and The Far Shore, Navigating Homelands 2018 at the Arab American National Museum. Other projects include Inheritance, Land, and Spirit for the Sharjah Biennial 9 in the United Arab Emirates, and the University of Hawaii podcast Land and People, which investigates Pacific Islanders' relationship with land. So big round of applause for all of our artists.
While Yazan couldn't be here today, we'd like to take the time to acknowledge the incredible work that he has done alongside a collective of creating this manifesto. So I believe it's being circulated, correct? So if you have the chance to see it, it's incredible. And I'll read it for you folks right now. And so the title is, it's by the Palestinian Pavilion, What is the Future of Art? A Manifesto Against the State of the World. In a world where genocide unfolds before our very eyes, shielded by nation-state rhetoric and bolstered by imperial powers of our times, we bear witness to unspeakable horrors. This witnessing is not metaphorical. It is stark reality. To witness now is to be complicit. Ignorance is no excuse, and inaction is cowardice. What is it that cannot be stopped? The global state structure, which dominated the 20th century, not only allows but actively enables genocide in Gaza and elsewhere in this world. Every genocide is perpetuated by a state. This machinery of destruction, guided by settler colonialism, fueled by capitalism, and empowered by technological might, and covered by complicit media giants, must be dismantled. We are confronted with ongoing efforts to alienate us from our political agency and the ability to strive towards a moral and just world for all. We ask, if this level of atrocity is now acceptable, then what is deemed unacceptable? We must reconsider what structures national identities have produced and restore our severed connection to the land as a source of our identity and political existence. The Palestinian struggle and resistance comes to remind us of what should not be forgotten. The people and the land embody each other in time and place. It is within this unbreakable bond that we envision the future. It is within this bond that we learn from the past, and through it we engage with our present. We refuse the state of the world, the brutality of maintaining the hegemony of the powerful, and the complicity of those who turn a blind eye to injustice. What role can art and poetry play in a future built on genocide? The Zionist state's atrocities permeate every level of existence. It devours all human knowledge and science by utilizing technology and social engineering to produce killing targets and destructing lists. With these new artificial intelligence technologies, every total meaning can be devoured, every total meaning can kill. Now is the time for art and poetry, for art that rejects the logic of prevailing power, for poetry that resists the totalitizing narratives that fuel the killing machines of the perpetrator. Art is inherently political in its message, production, and presentation. It engages with society, assuming a role either in complicity or resistance. Art and poetry represent our liberated knowledge, freed from the belly of the beast. This moment demands that we reclaim our political agency in its clarity. It empowers us to turn imagination into affirmative actions, forging poetic structures of collectivity, a return to the essence of our humanity. We belong to the world, to the earth, to the land, and through this agency, we move, act, and refuse to be silent accomplices to the state's atrocities. We cannot ignore the oppressive conditions under which creativity thrives. Faced with censorship or co-optation, we must resist glorifying the regime or fading into obscurity. We must defend our agency as political beings, stateless and as humanity itself. Collective is what our societies are. We are bound to organize and resist on multiple fronts to half the genocide and prevent it as a future. Palestine is the world in its future tense. So those are the words of Yazan and this collective. And in elaborating just for a bit on these incredible words, I think of Audre Lorde in talking about how poetry is not a luxury. And in terms of the context of Palestine and Hawaii, we are both experiencing, whether you're aware of it or not, occupations that are largely backed by US and American imperialism, but the ways in which Palestinians and Palestinians in the diaspora and Kanaka Maoli or Native Hawaiians in Hawaii and abroad have continued to resist this legacy of colonialism is through art, through poetry, through Mele Aloha Aina, or songs of resistance. And so as we continue this panel today, and sitting in the comfort of this museum, in the comfort of being in Hawaii, let us not forget the atrocities that are taking place just outside of this building, as well as in Palestine, because it inherently forms the art in which we want to produce and the artists in which we want to be in the world.
Yeah, thank you, Ihilani. So, that provocation that was put forth by Yazan and the Palestine Pavilion really makes us reflect on, what the purpose of art and the position of art oftentimes ends up being. So we have these amazing artists and want to hear from you. And I guess the first question is, you're really known, your art and your work in many ways is known for challenging systems, whether that's natural, whether that's man-made, and often speaks to issues around colonialism, sovereignty, solidarity. And I would want to pose a question to each of you is, how do you see the role of art, and in particular your art, in addressing these questions. So we could start with Melissa. We'll try to make it a conversation, but at first,
Sure.
just go down the line maybe.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you, Navid, for that, and thank you, Ihi, for reading Yazan's amazing words. In fact, he was the first person who sort of opened my eyes to the question of Palestine 15 years ago at the Sharjah Biennial. So here we are, talking about his words. I would just say, for my particular art practice, it isn't a didactic one. It really is a personal expression, and I always try to not equate my particular art making with the everyday work of social justice done by activists and others. It's really a reflection of my own experience, my own values, my heritage, which in and of themselves are polarizing and necessarily politicized, not through my choice that they are, but that's just how it is. The depiction of immigrants, for example, of Arabs. I mean, I was just talking to a dear friend of mine, Reem Bassouz, this morning about, the tropes of Arabs living in the desert and not having any, not being civilized, et cetera, et cetera. So my rendering of them, of people, is really just trying to challenge those stereotypes and rendering the various layers of their lived experiences beneath text, for example, and patterns and portraits. So I try to live in that ambiguity and in that richness.
Wait, is it? Oh, okay. May you please remind me of the question, because I seem to be the only one who did not bring.
No, just wanted you to talk a little bit about where you see the role of your work and either personally the work that you create or just art in general in addressing these topics that, we've been discussing.
Yeah, I can speak best to my personal experience and how that kind of informs the work that I make and why I make the work that I make. As a full-time kapa maker and artist whose main part of my practice is kapa making, it might not be immediately obvious on the surface when you look at images of my work that there might be political undertones or what might be seen as radical opinions, and layered within my work. And it's really interesting because I don't think that the work that I make is radical, but to some people it is harmful in their opinions and viewpoints on what Kanaka should be doing, on what Indigenous people should be saying about our lands, about the issues that affect our communities today. And so in some ways, yeah, you might say that kapa making is an act of radical resistance because it pushes back against the idea that as Native Hawaiian people, our culture was completely erased. It pushes back against the idea that our language is not important and our cultural practices are not important. And furthermore, I think it underlines the fact that many Native Hawaiians today are becoming politicized in terms of reclaiming not only our cultural practices, but the lands that support them as well. And because kapa is inherently tied to the lands that support this practice, I literally work with tree bark and dirt, and that is my job. It cannot be separated from the land that creates these trees, the water that grows them, the light that allows them to photosynthesize, and it also cannot be separated from the ochres, the plants that lend their colors to make the patterns that represent all of the things that I'm talking about conceptually within my work on top of that kapa. So I think my work implores, I hope, implores my audiences to think deeper than the surface about the genealogies of makers and ancestors and lands that have made the work possible, especially from a cultural practitioner point of view.
Amazing, thank you. There's a few points I think we'd want to come back to, but Russell, how do you see the role of your work in this conversation?
Well, actually, I guess I'd like to start with the reason, I do the work that I do. I was working for about 6 years in commercial art after graduating college. And at that point, I really wanted to do work that were more social political. And so when I came back, I did political art. I did work that was on South Africa at that time in the later 80s. There was, and so I did what was called Liberté, and it was mixed media. Also, I had been reading a lot about American Indian, Native Americans, and about struggle. I think in 1973, there was a rising at Wounded Knee, and there was this book that was In the Spirit of Crazy Horse, and one of the guys involved was Leonard Peltier. So I did, and he was railroaded into prison, and he's still in there. So anyway, I had done a painting that was called For Leonard Peltier, In the Spirit of Crazy Horse. So I've gone through a lot of kind of like evolving. First doing really political art, but there's challenges with that because you have those that are like-minded, and so they're kindred spirits. They appreciate that kind of work. A lot of people don't even look, they'll turn away and they don't want to think about these things. So I decided that, that I'll do them allegorically, and the whole purpose behind that is to get people to think deeper before they can, respond to political art. They have to realize that looking at art is not just like for pleasure or for entertainment or to hang up on your wall above the sofa kind of thing. But, maybe to get you to think deeper, to feel your humanity more. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. So I'm working with allegorical paintings, metaphors, and a lot of the imagery, like was mentioned, with animals that we have here, the land, they're drawn from my life experiences, from having lived here, and so anyway, I'll end it.
Yeah, thank you, Russell. Leonard Peltier just had a parole hearing just about a week and a half ago, so we'll see what happens in a few weeks. Our next question actually had to do with your lived experience and sort of how your lived experience informs your art and your work, and you each spoke to that a little bit, but if you don't mind, I would like you to just speak to that a little bit more. So maybe just start with Russell and talk about that lived experience in terms of, what you were just mentioning with the land and the animals. And
Okay, I'm going to read from here. My work is definitely an extension of myself, the community, and who I'm from. Everything is from my life lived, but put in metaphorically, having a hidden meaning or meanings like a kauna, hopefully to invite viewers to look into their own lived experiences. guess that's it.
Has that evolved for you over the years in terms of, your lived experiences feeding more into it, or do you feel like you're speaking for others or your community more?
Well, it's, I guess it evolves all the time because the times we live in change. And so I can maybe talk about one painting that I've done. It's called Instinct. And in it, I have a pig, a boar that's charging at an angle out of the picture plane. And there's two dogs that are like jumping on it. So the imagery for that was, of course, drawn from my having hunted on the Big Island, pig hunting with dogs. And, my first experience with that was really something because I was first there on the scene, where the dogs had cornered the pig, and the pig was on his haunches, and he was just shaking his head and screaming. The dogs were just charging in, doing what they do. And I had the rifle. I was so transfixed, though, that I was just watching. It was something else. Then, of course, a friend of mine caught up and just grabbed the gun, shot the pig. That was it. But so it's drawn from that kind of experience, and you can take it literally. The title is Instinct. But also, if you think a little bit more, it could be exactly the situation we have today with like Gaza, Israel, with Ukraine and Russia. And you can see which one is the more predatory one, which one is. The pig, by the way, was not just giving up in my painting. He had fierce eyes, and he was going to be swinging his head, He's not going to give up. So anyway, I think that's my story. So it's kind of evolved like that way, and keeps evolving.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you for that story. Lehua, how was your personal experience and lived experience inform your work? You spoke to that a bit, but if you don't mind, just going in a little bit deeper.
It was hard to answer the first question without kind of going into this one, I guess. But I think a huge part of, or a huge thing that has started to inform my work more and more in the last few years is thinking about all the different intersections of my identity that I embody. And you touched on it in my bio that I was born in Portland, Oregon, but raised in Papai'o, and my family has been on the Hamakua Coast for many generations. I was actually the first diaspora kid born outside of Hawaii on my dad's side. And so that intersection of being born in one place but raised in my ancestral homelands and kind of raised between the two, keeping that intersection kind of alive and one foot in each corner has been something that continually embodies my work. And like many of us here in Hawaii, I'm also mixed. So embodying the intersection of being raised with many different ethnic backgrounds and figuring out how that kind of plays out in the work that I make has also been important to me, because I'm not the only one with these kinds of experiences, and I think that's a beautiful thing about art. It's ability to bridge the gaps of communication where we think there are no similarities. There are actually oftentimes very many. And with over 50% of Native Hawaiians identifying individuals living abroad, not in Hawaii nowadays, it's more and more important that kanaka in the diaspora not only feel visible, feel represented, but feel valued here in our homelands as well. So keeping that channel alive is something that I feel Kapa has allowed me to do, whether it be here, home, or on the continent, or I don't know, in Australia. And then too, you know, we as Kanaka never really recognized blood quantum as a qualifier of how Kanaka you were. It was all about the genealogy. And so that's why when you go down to OHA and try to get your Hawaiian registry card, they don't ask, oh, are you 50%? No, okay, you kind of get the card. It's all about proving your genealogy. And with so many of us mixed and raised in many different places, households, cultural backgrounds, languages, it's been a point of healing for me to honor and recognize all the different ancestors from all over the world that make me who I am. And I've found that that's also been very healing and empowering for others in a similar experience as myself, also especially kids in the diaspora who are usually mixed as well. So those are kind of two through lines that are really informing my work and why I make the work that I make.
Well, wow, that's a tough question to answer. I would say I really do relate to what Lehu was talking about, and in terms of code switching, having different identities, coming from a mixed background myself. But I would say is for values that come through the work, it really stems from, you know, my family and just being raised with a tremendous amount of empathy and a sense of justice for people. You know, from my academic background, being in conservation, it's in a sense a way of advocating for the most, for plants and animals, things that have no voice in that sense. So it sort of follows that would be an interest of mine. But they're all connected, right? We're talking about people and land, and you know how that's played out in recent work. The latest painting that the State Foundation recently picked up, which had to do with the fires on Maui and the catastrophes in Gaza, both the violence inflicted on people by the abandonment of land or lack of care in the case of Maui, or intentionally by design, as in Palestine. So both of those things came together in a work that is called Not Even the Fiercest Wind. And that name takes its name from the alma mater of Lahaina Luna School, which says that not even the fiercest winds of Kaua'ula can ever extinguish the burning torch. You know, and I don't want to equate both of those things precisely, but there are tremendous parallels there that I think we don't need to get into that much. I think most of us can use our imagination. The other project I want to mention is one that is with my colleague, Dr. Clay Trowernicht, over there sitting against the wall. It's called Land and People. It's a podcast funded by the University of Hawaii, in which we interview people in the Pacific Islands with ancestral or professional ties to the land. And that project, the purpose of that one, is to not only present specific geographies of the Pacific and to archive them, if you will, but also to raise the voices of those who are intimately connected to the land in many different ways, through their work and through their ancestry and so forth. So again, you know, land and people, I think that's what we're all talking about here, our connection to the land as expressed in different ways.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Something that you said in terms of referencing Lahaina Luna in terms of light and fire is that lama. Something that I also wanted to add in terms of Lahaina, a place that we're talking about that what happened with Lahaina is also connected to imperialism and colonialism. As some folks know, Lahaina wasn't always as hot as it's been in the past 80 years. And so if we're talking about environmental catastrophe, our own colonization and the American occupation is what produces those types of disasters. The same kind of disasters that are produced in Palestine, especially in Gaza. But I also wanted to connect it back to you saying lama. So lama could like be light, lama could also be to enlighten. And there's like some kauna there too. They're saying that that torch that's pili or pertaining to Lahaina Luna, those winds will never be strong enough to extinguish that flame. But also talking about that enlightenment with Lahaina Luna being the first place where there was a printing press, the largest printing press in Hawaii at a specific point in time. So thinking about, I think this is this paper, Kalama Hawaii, or maybe I'm getting it wrong, or Ke'aulama Hawaii. It was one of the first Nupepa Hawaii to be produced in Hawaii and distributed, hundreds of thousands of pages. And in that Nupepa Hawaii was this lama lama, or this enlightenment, with mele Hawaii and poems and songs. So even thinking about how so much has changed, the aloha that folks have for Lahaina, for all of Hawaii can be seen in that work that was produced. And even going back to your multiple mediums and forms of art, I think you have each talked about how your identity has connected you to the mediums of art in which you produce, who you're producing for, and why. And I wanted to tie it back to how you, Lehua, have also talked about mo'oku ahau. Mo'oku ahau as being genealogy. It can be quite literally who your parents and grandparents and so on and so forth are from. But creatively speaking, you can also have an intellectual mo'oku ahau in terms of your practice or your craft. So who inspires you? Who are your kumu? Who are the kupuna in your community or in your practice that have inspired you? And our next question. Yeah, I'd love to hear that as well. In terms of your mo'oku ahau and kumu.
Yeah, I cannot do the work that I do without the kumu and the kumu that came before them. My primary kumu kapa is Uncle Wesley Sen of Moanalua. He's known my family for almost his whole life, and that's how he became my kumu. And he was one of the primary practitioners in the 1970s during the Hawaiian Renaissance, learning alongside Puanani Van Dorp, Dennis Kana'e, and also spent 13 plus years in Samoa learning from Mary Pritchard, who's a well-known siapo maker out there. And all of the acknowledged but unnamed kupuna that they carried with them, I must acknowledge as well, that have carried the knowledge through them to enable me to do the work that I make now.
It's beautiful. If any of you wanted to chime in on who some of your kumu may be connected to your practice. Or to your kumu.
Yeah, you know,
Yeah.
in terms of kind of influencing the way I look at the world, the way that the way that I look at the world today. You know, I had my Hakalo boys, yeah, and one of them, Bernard, we used to drink at his home a lot. His parents were always there. The mom was actually like a kumuhula, also a musician. She had her own group like that. But anyway, she would always talk to me. And she would, you know, tell me about their amakuas. And I'll tell you, you know, it's not just telling me a story and I'm just hearing it. She told me that their family amakua was the pueo. And, you know, I went outside. I had to relieve myself. And I'm standing right there on the side of the house. And I see a pueo flying around the house, and whoa. And another time, she told me that, Bernard, his Amakua was the shark. And one day later, we were drinking beer down Kolikoli State Park, and he tells us, because we have a fire going, I'm going out, poke one fish in and come back, puleo. And 15 minutes later, he's back. And I said, wow, his nickname was Kanak. I said, wow, Kanak, that was fast. How you get the fish? He said, I only went waist deep in the water, and the fish came right up to me. And I said, oh, okay. I said, Amakua at work too. So she was definitely a big influence, which, in a way, helped direct the way I work allegorically and try to draw from those lived experiences.
Mahalo. Thank you so much for talking about those mo'olelo, and especially referencing your kumu. Something that I'm thinking about is how your intellectual or like your creative mo'okua can also be very political in terms of who your kumu are, because the process of a kumu or having a kumu is that they have to choose you back as well, and they have to welcome you into their ohana or into their practice to learn from them. And so thinking about the politics and the power and the mana associated with kumu is something that I'm really interested in talking about and thinking about. But the adverse of that brings us to our next question. And it's, what is your experience with the depoliticization of art by various institutions? Do you see this trend as harmful or helpful to your personal practice?
You want me to answer that first?
If you would like to. I mean, the mic is open.
Okay, then. Okay. It makes me think of a friend, a fellow artist of Palestinian descent in New York City, whose scheduled exhibition at her alma mater was suddenly canceled a year in the planning because of her pro-Palestinian views. And here, locally, another friend of African American descent had his work removed from an exhibit because of a complaint that it made accusations of racism in our society. So in the first case, the artist is an abstract painter. And in the second, his image was metaphorical. So it didn't directly allude to these things. But in both, they included statements. And like for myself, I've done paintings that were clearly political in the past, that were in exhibits here. But I think the times were not as heated as it is now. The choir liked them, the paintings that I did. The rest just generally passed them by. So I believe true artists are independent thinkers, free spirits, and in that sense are always a threat to those that want to control and manipulate.
It's beautiful, Mahalo.
Well, Russell, you just read my mind, because Samia Halbi, whose full show, if you don't know who she is, her work isn't even, quote, political, it's abstract, and her alma mater, Indiana University Museum, had a full retrospective. I mean, she's in her 80s. I see a lot of nodding heads. People know this story. The catalog was printed, artwork created, I believe, and there are many. There are a handful of stories like that. I haven't had that experience here personally, but I do believe that all art is political, whether or not you want it to be, and that is everything from the maker to the institution. It's what you choose to include or what you don't choose to include as someone who's a painter or as a curator who decides what's in the collection. I definitely have had advice from curators saying, this is more of a commercial type of a show. And that says everything, right, to an artist. It's sort of like, puts the deep freeze, so to speak. So I think maybe the more treacherous territory for artists is self-censorship. I think that would go with anybody, an academic or a writer, who feels that they need to not say certain things in order to keep a career. And I think many of us in this room have witnessed what's going on as it relates to that.
Yeah, I think, as a young person, what I see a lot of nowadays in terms of, keeping up with the ongoing censorship and I think the question put it as depoliticization of art and art institutions. A lot of it comes from social media, and I think that's also because many people who are artists use their social media platforms as a tool for spreading information and sharing about, what's going on in places like Palestine. A close friend of mine, actually, they are a queer Navajo artist. Their name is Demian Dineyazi. Is one of those artists who's very bold and unfiltered and uncensored when it comes to their own personal voice, speaking out not only about issues related to Palestine, but also critiquing art institutions. And I think they're one of my favorite artists and most important artists today because of that. They also had work that was recently censored and pulled from an exhibition for being too radical, too political, too forthright in the message. And I think, that's something that Demian doesn't shy away from. And we need more artists like that who are critiquing the systems that perpetuate the idea that artists need to be a certain way or palatable to be safe for funders, acceptable for audiences, and I think as a Hawaiian artist who can see a lot of kinship in the work that artists like Demian does, but I don't necessarily. I think my work is a little bit more veiled in its approach. It's important to support not just conceptually, but also financially artists like Demian because it's not a safe space for artists who speak out. Whether that be visual, writing, performance, anything like that, it's not a safe space, whether you're on social media or in the real world. Critiquing institutions that censor is very much, it's not safe work, but it's important.
Absolutely. And to echo your words, which I resonate with a lot, we have to critique these institutions. And I think one of the really cool ways that I've seen some artists do that is doing a traditional practice of following the genealogy or the mo'okuahau of where these institutions come from. And oftentimes institutions have the capability or the power to put on shows or to fund artists that serves the interests of the history of those institutions. And just having you folks be here in the Doris Duke Theater, speaking back to the importance of ending those legacies, not just being decolonial, but anti-colonial, and figuring out how, many of these institutions have not done Native artists, Black artists, queer artists justice. And I think because of capitalism and because of settler colonialism, there's this produced logic of scarcity, even in the arts where there's only so many fellowships, there's only so many places that we can exhibit. but understanding that if we're thinking about art in its most political sense, it's meant to be lived, practiced, and enacted throughout the rest of the world, and not just within these institutions. And even seeing your folks' work, not just in galleries, but the ways in which you carry yourselves in community and the ways in which you live your lives is inherently a political act. So thank you so much for sharing. I do want to be respectful of other folks' time, so we are going to be going into the question and answer portion of this panel presentation. I believe Navid will be going out and handling the mic. Does any audience member have a question for the panelists?
Hello, thank you for your discussion today. I'm all for talking about resistance and also manifestos and genocide. My name's Jenny Fraser. I'm an artist and curator from Australia. And I have a question which fits this topic tonight, but is also inherently part of who I am. So I hope it's not taken with the wrong grain of salt, as they say. I hope it's cleansing in a good way, in native Hawaiian style. So I've noticed in my time here that the British Empire is an ally to Hawaii, native Hawaiian society, and I understand that is in contrast to the American Empire. So I'm just wondering how that fits, and if there's any Kanaka Maoli in the room who wants to speak to the fact or the concept that might be shifting due to the English giving Israel the Palestinian land. So is that something that's being discussed, or is shifting in consciousness? So I'm asking the question respectfully.
I almost want to pose this question to Ihi. I think you as a student...
This is your field of
at-
study.
Yeah, you as a student at UH who's very active within student activist groups in response to these events, I think that might be...
Can I answer the question? So like the unspoken rules of the art world in terms of moderating. Yeah, that's a great question, and I think the context in which the Hawaiian Kingdom and Britain have a relationship with each other should always be contested, because we have to look at the ways in which the Hawaiian Kingdom had to engage with imperialist countries out of threat of being colonized themselves. And obviously we're sitting here as an occupied territory of the United States. And so while we can acknowledge the work that our mo'i, our rulers, our ali'i, our chiefs did to build a relationship with Britain, I'm speaking for myself. If we want to seek sovereignty, and not just a state-centric sovereignty, I'm talking about ea, which can be sovereignty, but it's life, breath to rise. We have to look at ways of belonging outside of state-centric recognition. And for me, when I envision a deoccupied Hawaii and a free Pacific or Oceania at that, the recognition from Britain, France, the US, or the UN at large isn't something that I'm entirely concerned with when their recognition is predicated on genocide and extraction. Hawaii and Kanaka Maoli are identified as indigenous, but according to the United Nations Declaration of Rights on Indigenous Peoples, we don't qualify because we're a state. And by international law, we consented to being a part of the US, where if you know our history, there's no treaty of annexation. This is, by any and all means, an illegal occupation. So when we're thinking about the ways in which some Hawaiians might be proud to have a relationship with Britain through the Anglo-French proclamation, it might have been an incredible feat for a native country, a country that consists of brown people, to be recognized by Britain. But that recognition was still a game of white supremacy, and I reject that wholeheartedly. So thinking about if we're building a future, the world in which I want to see imperialism doesn't exist, and if that means that Britain as it exists today doesn't exist, if the United States as it exists today doesn't exist, then that's fine by me, because the life in which produces capitalism and colonialism is the one in which stifles our right to air out. And so, yeah, I don't think it was taken with like the wrong grain of salt. It feels very cleansing, because I feel like many Pacific nations need to engage with the ways in which we're striving for Western recognition. If you look at, and I'll kind of summarize this very quickly, there's a UN General Assembly on October 23rd of who wants to support or oppose a ceasefire resolution in Gaza. Majority of the countries, 6 of which were in the Pacific, 6 voted no to a ceasefire. And that's not because Pacific Islanders shouldn't be in solidarity with Palestinians or folks specifically in Gaza. It's because the US and Britain and France, specifically talking about New Caledonia and Akanaki Ohana, they're having to align with imperialism because the boot of US and British imperialism is already on our necks. And so that consent and that voting no is heavily coerced. And so, yeah, if we're thinking about meaning making a deoccupied Hawaii and Pacific, we have to look beyond Western recognition. And I'm not really concerned with the way Britain sees Hawaii anymore. It served its means, but all means have an end. And I'm looking forward to a new beginning. Mahalo. Okay.
Any other questions in the audience? There's one back here.
Hello, my name is Aiko. Thank you so much. This has been such a nice panel. I have a question that might seem a little bit redundant. Just like it might be just obvious, but I just want to know what you guys would think of it. Like just talking about the specifics of the parallels between like Palestine and Hawaii and Lahaina. Like I think just like as a very like broad just like explanation, just because like I'm a student like born here, but like I'm a student in Bellingham, and so I think like the conversations around Palestine are very different, and like from like Native American perspective, I think like that's sort of like the big discourse like that I've been sort of in, and so I like just want to be able to like be more of a resource and just like have like your guys' thoughts on it, like, and yeah, I don't know, like talking about specifics and just like, yeah, that's my question. It's just like parallels between Palestine and Hawaii and Lahaina, and like just like, yeah, just as a broad.
I can speak a little bit to that. I guess I in my background as someone who has been a steward of the land, I always think about these places and how they were thriving before Mala'ulu'ulele, in Lahaina, and all of the fish ponds, all of the farming, all of the ulu trees. Likewise in Palestine, ancient groves of lemon trees and olive trees and the cultivation of that. I think of the land and the changes to the land, and then the people who were caring for those places, and the wholesale destruction, due to imperial forces. So, which are, again, different, right? In some ways, but in a lot of other ways, the same. So, that's, as an artist, I drew those parallels in a recent artwork. I am always feeling like I don't know about you folks, but I'm always in the push-pull of like, should I be doing more activism and less art? But I also think that it really is a tangible thing to create, and creating is an act of resistance. Just being and being for something is an act of resistance. And to just contribute to that body of creativity and scholarship towards something different than what the hegemony presents to us is powerful, and it's tangible, and it has material impact and effect on people. So I think those of us sitting here, and many of you folks here in the audience are doing the work, even if we're not out there, protesting in the streets every day. I think we're connected, and we have solidarity in that way.
I also want to just add, I'm not going to make it a long thing, but the through line that connects Lahaina, Hawaii's history, and what's ongoing in Palestine right now is settler colonialism. The Lahaina fires would not have happened if the Kanaka whose ancestral homelands and ancestors who were born and raised and buried on those lands for hundreds, thousands of years, if they were still the stewards of that land and were not dispossessed from their aina, dispossessed from their language and culture as they have been, and in turn causing the environmental crises that have led to what domino affected into the fires. Same thing with Palestine. And, it's a much more violent, immediate effect of settler colonialism. But again, the cultural genocide and the ethnic cleansing is a parallel. And that's something that we also have here in Hawaii, where our language was outlawed, our culture was highly stigmatized, and aspects of it were outlawed, replaced by foreign religion, foreign practices, foreign language. And that in turn led to, again, the dispossession of our people from our language, culture, and lands. So there's a through line with settler colonialism that's a machine that connects all of these stories. And while they are separated by thousands of miles of land and oceans, it's the same principles of erasure and removal. And oftentimes, I would say all times, that plays out in violent ways, whether it seems violent on the surface or more of a slow violence over time.
Thank you all very much. We've gone over our time and wish we had several more hours for this conversation. I know there's more questions, but thank you so much for joining us. And a big mahalo to Hawaii Contemporary, the Art Summit, the Honolulu Museum of Art, Doris Duke Theater,